You think your automations keep failing because your logic is wrong. They don't. The logic is usually fine. What's missing is something most tutorials never mention, a layer that sits underneath the logic entirely. It's called the 3-trigger rule, and once you see it, you'll know exactly why every automation you've ever rebuilt still came back broken. We've spent the last 6 weeks running this across real professional workflows, not demos, not toy examples. Billing systems, client onboarding pipelines, content calendars, project management triggers, and the pattern is the same every single time. 3 triggers. Most builds have one. Some have 2. Almost nobody ships all 3. That's the whole problem. Here's why this matters right now. Automation has never been more accessible. Every major platform, Make.com, Zapier, N8N, has added AI modules in the last 18 months. The promise is that you build it once and it runs itself. But about 63% of automation projects get fully rebuilt within 18 months of launch. And the reason isn't the tools. The tools are genuinely better than they've ever been. The reason is that nobody is teaching the architecture. They're teaching you how to connect app A to app B. They're not teaching you what the automation needs to know before it fires, what it needs to catch when something goes sideways, and how it knows it actually worked. Those are your 3 triggers. And right now, your builds are probably missing at least 2 of them. Before we get into the rule itself, I want to ask you something. Which of these sounds familiar? Your automation fired twice on the same record. It ran perfectly in testing and broke on day 1 in production, or it just quietly stopped and you found out 3 days later when a client asked where their thing was? Drop the number in the comments. 1, 2, or 3. Because what you pick tells us exactly which trigger you're missing. Now, here's how the 3-trigger rule actually works. Think of any automation. Like a flight, you need 3 things: clearance to take off, a system that handles turbulence mid-flight, and a confirmation that the plane landed. Most people build the takeoff. They skip the turbulence system. They definitely skip the landing confirmation. And then they wonder why the flight log says completed, but nobody received the package. Trigger 1 is the state trigger. This is the most misunderstood piece of automation architecture, and it's the one almost every tutorial gets wrong. Most people build their automations to fire when something happens. A row is added. A form is submitted. A tag is applied. That's event-based logic, and it works fine in a perfect world. But the real world is not a perfect world. The state trigger fires when something is, not just when something changes. Here's the difference. If you fire on status change to approved, you catch the change exactly once. But what if the field was already set to approved before your automation existed? What if a sync glitch rolled it back and then forward again? What if 2 systems wrote to the same record at the same millisecond? Event-based logic misses all of that. State-based logic doesn't care how the field got there. It checks whether the condition is currently true and acts accordingly. In practice, this means adding a verification filter before your first action module, not after. Before, in Make.com, that's a filter module immediately after your trigger. In Zapier, it's a filter step before any action. In N8N, it's an if node at the top of your flow. That single filter is your state trigger. And without it, your automation is essentially trusting that the world behaved perfectly between the last time it ran and right now. It didn't. Trigger 2 is the exception trigger. This is the one that accounts for about 47% of automation failures, and it's almost never built intentionally. Most people add error handling after something breaks. That's the wrong order. The exception trigger is a deliberate second path built into the automation before you ever run it live. It answers the question, what does this automation do when the happy path fails? Here's what this looks like in practice. You're automating a client invoice workflow. The happy path. New invoice created, sent to client, logged in your CRM. 49 times out of 50, that runs fine. The 50th time, the CRM API is down for 11 minutes. Without an exception trigger, your automation either errors out silently or retries infinitely. With an exception trigger, it routes the failed record to a separate queue, sends you a Slack message with the invoice ID and the error code, and sets a flag on the record so it doesn't fire again when the CRM comes back up. That's the difference between an automation that fails and an automation that degrades gracefully. In Make.com, This is the error handler module attached to any module that touches an external API. In Zapier, it's a path step with an error condition on the second branch. In N8N, it's the error trigger node wired to a dedicated error handling subflow. The exact implementation differs by platform, but the principle is the same. Every external call needs a planned failure path. Not a hoped-for one, a planned one. If you're building on real workflows, and this is already paying off, we break down frameworks like this every week on real tools. No sponsored takes, no affiliate-driven rankings. If a tool is better, we say so. If it's not worth your money, we say that too. That's what this channel is here for. Trigger 3 is the confirmation trigger. And this is the one that separates amateur automation from professional automation. The confirmation trigger closes the loop. It doesn't just run the automation. It verifies that the automation produced the intended outcome. This sounds obvious. Almost nobody does it. Here's a real example. You automate sending a proposal document to a prospect. Your automation sends the email. It logs sent in your CRM. Done, right? Not quite. Did the email actually deliver? Did the attachment attach? Did it land in spam? Did the CRM log the right record? Or did it log against the wrong contact because two records share an email address? The confirmation trigger checks a downstream state, not the automation's own output. It's not, did I fire the send command? It's, does the downstream system now reflect the expected state? In practice, this is a verification module at the end of your flow that queries the target system and compares the result against expected values. If it matches, the run closes cleanly. If it doesn't, it routes to your exception trigger, which you already built in step 2. Those two triggers work together. The exception trigger handles mid-flow failures. The confirmation trigger catches end-state mismatches. Neither one replaces the other. The average professional running broken automations loses about 11 hours a week chasing errors, rerunning failed jobs, and manually completing tasks that were supposed to be automated. 11 hours every week. That's a full billable day and a half that vanishes into a workflow that almost worked. Now let's look at how the 3 platforms actually implement this rule, because the theory is the same, but the execution is not. And the differences matter a lot depending on how you work. Make.com is the strongest platform for the 3 trigger rule out of the box. The filter module handles your state trigger cleanly. The error handler is a first-class feature you attach it to any module individually, which means you can have different error paths for different failure modes in the same scenario. And the HTTP module at the end of a flow is easy to configure as a confirmation query. The whole architecture costs you maybe 5 extra modules per scenario. That's it. 5 modules between an automation that breaks and one that runs for 18 months without a rebuild. Zapier handles the state trigger well through filter steps, and it's genuinely easier to set up for non-technical users. But the exception trigger is where Zapier struggles. The paths feature can approximate it, but you're essentially building your error path as a parallel happy path, which means it doesn't inherit the context of the failure automatically. You have to pass that context manually. For simple workflows, that's fine. For anything with more than 4 steps and 2 external APIs, it gets messy fast. N8N is the most powerful of the 3 for professional builds, but it requires the most setup time. The error trigger node is genuinely excellent. It's a dedicated subflow that fires whenever any node in your main flow fails, and it automatically receives the error object with full context. That's better than what Make offers. But N8N's learning curve means most people never get past the basics, and the self-hosted version adds infrastructure overhead that solo practitioners usually can't justify. Here's our take, and we'll be direct about it. If you're a solo consultant or a small team that bills by the hour and you need reliable automations running in the next 30 days, Make.com is the right tool. The 3 trigger rule is easiest to implement correctly there. The error handling is the most visual, and the operations-based pricing model, affiliate, link, make, means you're not paying per task, you're paying per run. That matters when your confirmation trigger adds a verification call at the end of every execution. Before we get to the full verdict, one more question for you. Are you currently running automations in production right now? And if you are, which of the 3 triggers do you think you're actually missing? Drop it in the comments. State trigger, exception trigger, or confirmation trigger. We read every one. And if there's a specific tool or workflow you want us to test this rule against, that's exactly the kind of thing we'd build a video around. So who should buy, who should wait, and who should skip entirely? Here's the breakdown by role. You buy, make.com, now, affiliate, link, make. If you're a consultant, agency, or operations lead running more than 3 active workflows that touch external APIs, the 3-trigger rule pays for itself the first time it prevents a silent failure in a client-facing process. We've seen builds that were getting manually fixed twice a week run completely clean for 4 months after implementing all 3 triggers. That's not a demo result. That's a real workflow. You wait on N8N if you're technical, but don't have dedicated infrastructure time right now. The tool is genuinely better in certain ways. The exception trigger architecture in particular is more sophisticated than anything Make offers. But better in theory doesn't help you if setup takes 3 weekends and you're billing hourly. Wait until you have a workflow complex enough to justify the investment. Affiliate, link, N8N. You skip Zapier for anything serious. That's a defensible opinion, and we'll stand behind it. Zapier is the right tool for getting a non-technical person to connect 2 apps in 20 minutes. It is not the right tool for building automation architecture with all 3 triggers implemented correctly. The exception handling limitation we showed you isn't a minor edge case. It's the trigger that catches about 47% of failures. Zapier makes it harder than it should be. Affiliate, link, Zapier. One more number before we close. Professionals who implement all 3 triggers report a 71% drop in manual interventions within the first 60 days. 71%. That's not fewer problems. That's an entirely different relationship with your own automation stack. The tools didn't change. The architecture did. If you want to go deeper on the exception triggers specifically, we built a full video on error handling patterns in make.com, including how to set up a dead letter queue for failed records, so nothing ever disappears silently. That one's already up. Go watch it next, because the exception trigger is where most of your current automation debt is hiding. And what should we test next? If you've got a tool or a specific workflow you want us to run the 3-trigger rule against, drop it below. We build the next video around what you actually need, not what's trending.